They called her a paper soldier the moment she stepped through the gates of Fort Valdez, whispered that she'd probably seen more action behind a computer screen than in any real battlefield. But when her jacket sleeve caught on the door handle, and Lieutenant Colonel Rivera glimpsed the digital counter embedded in her tactical armband, showing numbers that made his blood run cold, the entire base would learn why their most dangerous missions had a 97% success rate. She wasn't just another desk jockey with shiny new gear. She was the reason half the enemy strongholds in the Korvan Valley no longer existed, and why 3 arrogant infantry specialists were about to receive the most humbling lesson of their military careers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Want to know what those numbers really meant, and how a woman they dismissed as headquarters fluff turned out to be the most lethal operator in the entire Pacific Command? Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments what you think makes someone a real soldier rank, experience, or something else entirely. Because by the end of this story, you'll never look at quiet confidence the same way again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of Fort Valdez, the largest joint operations base on the West Coast. Nestled between the rolling hills of Northern California and the Pacific shoreline, Valdez had been home to 3 generations of America's finest warriors. The base sprawled across 15,000 acres of carefully maintained terrain, from urban warfare simulation zones to live-fire ranges that echoed with the constant rhythm of preparation and precision. Staff Sergeant Daniela Voss pushed through the entrance of the tactical training complex, her boots barely making a sound on the polished concrete floors. At 31, she moved with an economy of motion that suggested either exceptional training or hard-earned experience, though to the casual observer, it might have seemed like nothing more than natural grace. Her uniform was regulation perfect, creases sharp enough to cut paper, but there was something in the way she wore it that set her apart from the typical base personnel. The TTC smelled like gun oil and determination, that unique cocktail of metal and ambition that permeated every serious military training facility from Benning to Bragg. Industrial lighting hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made everyone look either younger or older than they actually were, never quite right. The walls were lined with achievement boards, unit photographs, and the kind of motivational posters that had inspired or annoyed soldiers for decades. Voss carried a standard tactical pack and wore the digital camouflage pattern that had become ubiquitous across all branches. But if you looked closely, really looked, you'd notice subtle differences. Her gear was broken in, but meticulously maintained, the kind of equipment that had seen real use, but had been cared for by someone who understood that their life might depend on every buckle, every strap, every piece of hardware functioning perfectly when it mattered most. On her left arm, partially concealed by her jacket sleeve, was a piece of equipment that most personnel had never seen outside of specialized units. It looked like a standard tactical computer, the kind used for GPS navigation and communication, but embedded in its face was a small digital display that currently read a series of numbers that would have meant nothing to most observers. Just another piece of high-tech gear that seemed to proliferate throughout modern military operations. The early morning training rotation was just beginning, and the facility buzzed with the particular energy of soldiers preparing for another day of honing skills they hoped they'd never need to use for real. Equipment clanked and voices carried as units prepared for everything from close quarters combat drills to advanced marksmanship training. The air circulation system worked overtime, moving the scent of cleaning solvents and metal through spaces designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Near the equipment checkout area, 3 soldiers stood in that loose formation that spoke of familiarity and shared confidence in their own abilities. Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez, Sergeant Jake Whitfield, and Corporal Alex Chen, all in their mid-20s, all carrying themselves with the particular swagger that came from being considered among the best in their respective specialties. They were infantry, the backbone of any military operation, and they wore that identity like armor against anything that suggested their skills were the gold standard of military competence. Rodriguez spotted Vos first, his eyes tracking her movement across the training floor with the lazy interest of someone perpetually looking for entertainment or an excuse to demonstrate their superior knowledge of military culture. She was new, or at least new to their training rotation, and in the tight-knit world of base operations, new meant unproven until demonstrated otherwise. "Check it out," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying that tone of manufactured authority that some soldiers used when they thought they were being observant rather than judgmental. "Fresh meat from headquarters. Bet she's here to observe our training methods for some efficiency report." Whitfield grinned, the expression not quite reaching his eyes as he sized up the newcomer. "Definitely looks like the type who thinks warfare is about logistics and supply chains. Probably has a degree in something that ends with studies, and thinks that makes her qualified to evaluate real soldiers." Chun snorted, adjusting his gear with the kind of exaggerated precision that men use when they want to appear professional while making a point. Total paper soldier vibes. I bet she's never even heard a shot fired in anger, let alone fired one herself. Probably thinks combat effectiveness can be measured with spreadsheets and performance metrics. They laughed, the kind of easy, casual laughter that soldiers use when they think they're being clever and no one important enough to matter is listening. The sound mixed with the ambient noise of a training facility coming to life, metal on metal, boots on concrete, the distant crack of rifles from the outdoor ranges, and the steady hum of ventilation systems working to keep the air moving through spaces designed for function rather than comfort. Vos continued toward the equipment area, seemingly oblivious to their commentary, but moving with the kind of purposeful direction that suggested she knew exactly where she was going and why. She set her pack down near a bank of lockers and began the methodical process of preparing for whatever training exercise had brought her to the TTC this morning. Every movement was precise, economical, the kind of efficiency that came from either exceptional training or extensive experience, though from a distance. It was impossible to tell which dot as she adjusted her gear. The sleeve of her jacket shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of the device strapped to her forearm. The digital display caught the overhead lighting for just a moment, showing numbers that would have been meaningless to most observers but represented something far more significant to anyone trained to recognize such equipment. But in the busy environment of a training facility preparing for the day's exercises, such details were easily missed by those whose attention was focused on their own preparations and assumptions. The three infantry soldiers continued their casual observations, secure in their understanding of military hierarchy and the natural order of things, unaware that they were about to receive an education in the difference between appearance and reality, between assumption and truth, and between what they thought they knew about warfare and what warfare actually demanded from those who excelled at it. The morning was young, the training schedule was full, and everyone present believed they understood exactly what kind of day lay ahead of them. They were wrong, but they wouldn't realize it until much later, when the quiet woman with the regulation uniform and the mysterious device on her arm had finished, demonstrating the difference between playing soldier and being one. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tactical training complex at Fort Valdez had been constructed during the height of the Cold War, when military planners believed that the next great conflict would be fought in urban environments against sophisticated enemies who understood both conventional and unconventional warfare. The result was a facility that looked more like a small city than a traditional training ground, complete with multi-story buildings designed to simulate everything from office complexes to residential neighborhoods, underground tunnel systems that mimicked subway networks and modular walls that could be reconfigured to represent any urban environment from Detroit to Damascus. Morning light filtered through the high windows of the main training hall, creating geometric patterns on the polished concrete floor that would shift and change as the sun moved across the California sky. The air was crisp and clean, circulated by an industrial ventilation system that had been upgraded 3 times since the facility's original construction, but still carried the faint metallic scent of decades of equipment, maintenance, and the lingering residue of countless training exercises. The walls were lined with equipment lockers made of reinforced steel, each one numbered and color-coded according to a system that made perfect sense to anyone who'd spent more than a week at Valdez but remained mysteriously incomprehensible to visiting personnel. Above the lockers, mounted on tracks that allowed them to be repositioned as needed, were dozens of flat-screen monitors that could display everything from satellite imagery to tactical diagrams to leave feeds from training exercises in progress. At 7:30 in the morning, the TTC hummed with the particular energy of a military facility, transitioning from the quiet efficiency of night operations to the controlled chaos of a full training day. Equipment clerks moved between storage areas with the mechanical precision of people who'd performed the same tasks hundreds of times, checking inventories and preparing gear packages for the various units scheduled to cycle through the facilities. Programs. The floor was marked with colored lines that designated different traffic patterns: green for equipment movement, yellow for personnel, red for emergency evacuation routes, and blue for the specialized pathways used when live ammunition was being transported to and from the underground ranges. It was a system that had evolved over decades of operation, refined by countless small improvements and the occasional major revision necessitated by new equipment or changing tactical doctrines. Near the center of the main hall, a large digital display board showed the day's training schedule in the kind of military time format that turned civilian visitors into confused tourists asking for translation. The board updated automatically every few minutes, reflecting last-minute changes in personnel assignments, weather-related modifications to outdoor exercises, and the inevitable adjustments that came from the reality that military operations, even training operations, rarely proceeded exactly according to plan. The acoustic properties of the space had been carefully engineered to minimize echo and reverberation, but the result was an environment where every sound seemed somehow amplified and isolated at the same time. Footsteps carried with crystalline clarity. Conversations remained intelligible even across considerable distances, and the metallic clicks and clatters of equipment preparation created a constant background symphony that experienced personnel learned to filter out while newcomers found oddly hypnotic. Overhead, a network of catwalks and observation platforms allowed training supervisors to monitor exercises from elevated positions, while hidden cameras and sensors throughout the facility recorded everything for later analysis and evaluation. The technology was state-of-the-art, but implemented with the kind of military pragmatism that prioritized function over form. Cables were routed efficiently rather than aesthetically. Equipment was mounted securely rather than elegantly. And every system had at least 2 backup methods for accomplishing its primary function. The climate control system maintained a constant temperature that balanced the needs of personnel comfort with the requirements of sensitive electronic equipment, creating an environment that felt neither warm nor cool, but simply neutral, the kind of carefully controlled atmosphere that allowed people to focus on their tasks without distraction from environmental factors. The air moved constantly but quietly. A gentle circulation prevented the stuffiness that could accumulate in large, enclosed spaces while avoiding the drafts that might interfere with precision activities. Storage areas branched off from the main hall like the chambers of a well-organized heart, each one specialized for particular types of equipment or training scenarios. The weapons storage area was secured behind multiple layers of electronic locks and physical barriers, while the communications equipment section looked more like a high-end electronics store than a military facility. Vehicle simulation areas contained everything from Humvee mock-ups to helicopter crew compartments, all designed to provide realistic training environments without the expense and complexity of using actual operational equipment. The facilities. Designers had understood that effective training required not just the right equipment and procedures, but also the right psychological environment. The TTC felt serious without being oppressive, challenging without being intimidating, and professional without being sterile. It was a place where both new recruits and experienced veterans could push their limits and expand their capabilities. Supported by infrastructure that anticipated their needs and accommodated their efforts. In the corners and along the walls, smaller specialized areas provided space for individual preparation and equipment maintenance. These semi-private zones allowed personnel to focus on personal gear checks, individual skill practice, and the kind of mental preparation that was as important as physical readiness in military operations. Mirrors, targets, and measurement tools were available for those who preferred to refine their techniques away from the observation and potential judgment of others. The morning light continued to shift as the sun climbed higher, gradually transforming the character of the space from the cool, focused atmosphere of early morning preparation to the warmer, more energetic environment of active training. It was a daily transformation that regular users of the facility had learned to read like a clock, understanding instinctively how the changing light corresponded to the rhythms of military training and the cycles of preparation, execution, and evaluation that defined effective skill development. This was the world that Staff Sergeant Daniela Voss had entered, a precisely engineered environment designed to test, challenge, and improve the capabilities of those who might one day be called upon to defend their nation in circumstances where failure meant far more than poor performance evaluations or disappointed supervisors. It was a serious place for serious people engaged in serious work, and everything about its design and operation reflected that fundamental truth. Staff Sergeant Daniela Voss moved through the equipment checkout area with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested she'd navigated similar facilities countless times before. At first glance, she appeared to be exactly what the base's administrative systems indicate: a staff-level, non-commissioned officer with a spotless service record and the kind of technical certifications that typically kept personnel assigned to headquarters units rather than field operations. Her appearance was regulation perfect but unremarkable. Medium height, athletic build that suggested regular PT, but nothing exceptional. Dark hair pulled back in a standard military bun that revealed no personality or individual flair. Her uniform fit properly, but not with the custom tailoring that some career soldiers adopted to distinguish themselves. Everything about her presentation suggested competence without calling attention to herself, the military equivalent of hiding in plain sight. But there were subtle indicators that told a different story to anyone trained to recognize them. Her boots were standard issue but broken in with the kind of wear pattern that came from movement across varied terrain rather than just parade grounds and office floors. The leather showed the microscopic scarring that resulted from extended periods in harsh environments, and the way she'd laced them spoke of someone who understood that foot care could be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her gear, while appearing standard from a distance, had been modified in small ways that spoke of practical experience rather than theoretical knowledge. The shoulder straps on her tactical vest had been adjusted with additional padding in locations that suggested she'd spent significant time carrying heavy loads over long distances. Her utility pouches were arranged in a configuration that prioritized quick access over appearance, and the placement of her equipment reflected the kind of muscle memory that developed only through extensive use under stress. The way she checked her gear was revealing to anyone who understood the difference between routine inspection and operational preparation. She didn't simply verify that items were present, she tested function, examined wear points, and made minor adjustments with the automatic precision of someone whose life had depended on equipment reliability. Her hands moved over familiar items with the confidence of a surgeon checking instruments, each touch purposeful and diagnostic. Most telling was her situational awareness. While appearing to focus entirely on her equipment preparation, she was actually cataloging everything happening around her. Her peripheral vision tracked personnel movement throughout the facility. Her hearing sorted through ambient noise to identify significant sounds, and her positioning gave her clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. It was the kind of comprehensive, environmental monitoring that became second nature to those who'd operated in environments where threats could emerge from any direction at any moment. The tactical computer strapped to her left forearm appeared to be standard communication and navigation equipment, the kind that had become increasingly common as military operations incorporated more sophisticated technology. But closer examination would have revealed that this particular unit had been hardened beyond normal specifications, with additional shielding and backup power systems that suggested it was designed to function under conditions that would disable conventional electronics. The digital display currently showed what appeared to be routine operational data time, date, GPS coordinates, and communication status indicators. But embedded within those seemingly mundane readouts was a small secondary display that tracked different information entirely. The numbers currently visible, a simple sequence that changed periodically, would have been meaningless to most observers, but they represented a tally that had earned her recognition at the highest levels of military command and made her presence at Fort Valdez a matter of significant strategic importance. Her interaction with the facility's systems was smooth and professional, but there were subtle indicators that she was more familiar with military operations than her current assignment suggested. She signed for equipment using abbreviated movements that spoke of extensive experience with military paperwork, and her equipment selections reflected knowledge of capabilities and limitations that typically came only from field experience rather than classroom instruction. When she moved, there was an economy of motion that suggested training beyond standard military instruction. Her posture was relaxed but ready, the kind of controlled alertness that allowed for instant response without broadcasting tension or concern. She navigated around obstacles and other personnel with the fluid awareness of someone who'd learned to move efficiently in crowded, potentially dangerous environments. Her facial expression remained neutral and professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested depths not reflected in her current assignment. She observed everything but appeared to judge nothing, maintaining the kind of emotional discipline that came from experience in situations where personal reactions could compromise mission objectives or endanger personnel. The respect she showed for equipment and facilities went beyond mere military courtesy. She handled everything with the careful attention of someone who understood that seemingly minor details could have major consequences, and her preparation routine reflected standards that exceeded normal requirements without being showy or attention-seeking. Communication style, in the few brief interactions she had with facility personnel, was direct and efficient without being curt or dismissive. She asked for what she needed, provided required information clearly, and avoided unnecessary conversation that might delay operations or compromise operational security. It was the communication pattern of someone accustomed to working in environments where clarity and brevity were essential rather than simply preferred. The timing of her arrival and preparation suggested planning and coordination that went beyond individual initiative. She moved through required procedures with the smooth efficiency of someone following a carefully developed schedule, but there was enough flexibility in her approach to suggest that she was prepared to adapt to changing circumstances or unexpected developments. Her equipment loadout was lighter than what infantry personnel typically carried, but the items she'd selected were chosen with the precision of someone who understood exactly what would be required for her specific mission parameters. Nothing was included that wasn't essential, but everything essential was accounted for with backup options where appropriate. There was a quiet confidence in her demeanor that came not from arrogance or assumption of superiority, but from the kind of self-knowledge that developed through extensive testing under challenging conditions. She knew her capabilities and limitations with the precision of someone who'd been forced to rely on both in circumstances where miscalculation could have fatal consequences. As she completed her preparation, she moved toward the training areas with the same purposeful efficiency that had characterized her entire routine. She was ready for whatever exercises the day would bring, but her readiness encompassed far more than what would be apparent to casual observers, or even to the experienced military personnel, who would soon discover that their assumptions about her capabilities were not just wrong, but dangerously incomplete. Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez had built his reputation on being able to size up personnel within the first 30 seconds of observation, and he'd rarely been wrong about the essential character of anyone who crossed his path. At 27, he'd earned his stripes through 3 deployments to Afghanistan and 2 to Iraq, accumulating enough combat experience to distinguish himself from the weekend warriors and desk jockeys who populated the rear echelon units. His confidence wasn't entirely misplaced. He genuinely understood infantry tactics, small unit leadership, and the kind of ground-level warfare that had defined American military operations for the past 2 decades. Rodriguez stood 6'2", with the kind of build that came from combining military fitness requirements with personal dedication to strength training. His uniform was tailored just enough to emphasize his physical conditioning without violating regulations, and he carried himself with the swagger that came from being consistently ranked among the top performers in his unit. He'd never lost a competition in the training facilities at Valdez, whether the contest involved marksmanship, physical fitness, or tactical problem-solving, and that record had given him a confidence that bordered on arrogance when evaluating the capabilities of others. His specialty was close-quarters combat and urban warfare tactics, skills that had served him well during house-to-house fighting in Ramadi and squad-level operations in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. He'd been decorated twice for valor under fire, and those commendations weren't ceremonial. They represented moments when his training, instincts, and physical courage had kept his teammates alive and mission objectives achievable. But success in conventional infantry operations had also given him a narrow definition of what constituted real military competence. Sergeant Jake Whitfield shared Rodriguez's confidence but expressed it differently. At 26, he was the unit's designated marksman, capable of placing shots accurately at distances that exceeded the capabilities of standard infantry weapons. His expertise with long-range precision shooting had made him invaluable during operations that required elimination of specific targets from concealed positions, and his ability to provide overwatch for advancing units had earned him respect. Throughout the base's sniper community, Whitfield was leaner than Rodriguez, built more for endurance and stability than pure strength. His hands showed the calluses and minor scars that came from extensive weapons maintenance and thousands of hours of practice with equipment that demanded absolute precision. He approached military service with the methodical mindset of someone who understood that success in his specialty required patience, calculation, and the ability to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect shot opportunity. His deployment history included some of the most challenging assignments available to conventional military snipers, including counter-sniper operations in urban environments and reconnaissance missions that had required him to remain in position for days while gathering intelligence on enemy movements. He'd accumulated more confirmed long-range eliminations than anyone else in his pay grade, and those achievements had given him a professional confidence That was well-earned, but had also created blind spots in his understanding of other military specialties. Corporal Alex Chun represented the technical evolution of modern military operations. At 24, he was younger than his companions but had already established himself as an expert in the electronic warfare systems that had become increasingly important in contemporary conflicts. His specialty involved the operation and maintenance of communication jamming equipment, battlefield surveillance systems, and the kind of sophisticated electronics that could disrupt enemy coordination while providing friendly forces with tactical advantages. Chun had grown up with technology in ways that his older colleagues had not, and his intuitive understanding of complex systems had made him indispensable during operations that required integration of multiple electronic capabilities. He could coordinate drone surveillance, satellite communication, and electronic countermeasures simultaneously, while maintaining the kind of situational awareness that prevented technological dependence from becoming a tactical liability. His technical expertise had proven crucial during several high-stakes operations, where conventional approaches had been insufficient, but Chun's confidence in his technological capabilities had also created a bias toward solutions that emphasized equipment sophistication over human factors. He tended to evaluate military effectiveness in terms of technical proficiency and technological integration, sometimes underestimating the importance of experience, intuition, and the kind of hard-earned wisdom that couldn't be programmed into any system. The three soldiers had formed a natural alliance based on mutual respect for each other's specialized capabilities and shared confidence in their collective understanding of modern military operations. They'd worked together extensively, both in training exercises and actual deployments, developing the kind of professional chemistry that made them effective as a team while also reinforcing their individual biases about what constituted real military competence. Their morning routine at the tactical training complex followed patterns established over months of working together. Rodriguez typically assumed the role of informal leader, making initial assessments and setting the tone for group interactions. Whitfield provided analytical perspective, evaluating situations with the methodical approach he brought to precision shooting. Chun contributed technical insight and often served as the voice of skepticism when discussing the capabilities of personnel or equipment he hadn't personally verified. When Rodriguez spotted Voss moving through her equipment preparation routine, his initial assessment followed predictable patterns. Her age suggested limited recent field experience. Her assignment implied administrative rather than operational responsibilities, and her gender activated unconscious biases that, despite official military policies and his own professional training, still influenced his expectations about combat effectiveness. "New face in the rotation," Rodriguez observed, his tone carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Probably here for some kind of staff evaluation or efficiency study. You know how headquarters loves to send observers to see how the real soldiers do their jobs." Whitfield studied Voss with the same focused attention he brought to target acquisition, but his analysis was filtered through assumptions about the relationship between appearance and capability. "Definitely looks like administration," he agreed. "Probably has advanced degrees in logistics or personnel management. The kind of officer track that keeps you safe in air-conditioned offices while other people do the dangerous work." Chun's assessment was influenced by his technical background and his tendency to categorize personnel based on their apparent familiarity with sophisticated equipment. "Check out her gear setup," he said, gesturing toward Voss's position. "Everything looks fresh from supply. Probably never had to maintain equipment under field conditions or deal with systems failure when lives were on the line." Their commentary wasn't motivated by malice or deliberate disrespect, but rather by a combination of professional pride, limited perspective, and the natural human tendency to evaluate others based on familiar categories and personal experience. They genuinely believed that their assessment was accurate and that their expertise qualified them to judge the military capabilities of someone whose background and experience they knew nothing about. The irony was that their individual specialties, infantry, tactics, precision shooting, and electronic warfare, were all components of the kind of integrated operations that Voss had been coordinating and executing at levels far beyond their current understanding. But their perspective was limited by their experience, and their experience had taught them that real military competence was demonstrated in specific ways that matched their own backgrounds and achievements. As they continued their observations and commentary, they were unknowingly setting themselves up for an education that would fundamentally challenge their assumptions about military expertise, operational effectiveness, and the relationship between appearance and capability. The lesson was approaching, but they had no idea how comprehensive and humbling it would prove to be. The first direct interaction occurred when Rodriguez decided that professional courtesy required him to acknowledge the newcomer's presence. Though his approach carried the particular tone of someone who believed he was being generous with his attention. He walked over to where Voss was completing her equipment check, his movements casual but purposeful, designed to establish his position as someone familiar with the facility and its operations. "First time at the TTC?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying what he probably thought was helpful friendliness, but which actually conveyed a subtle assumption of superiority. It can be a little overwhelming if you're used to working in more controlled environments. The pace here is different from what most staff personnel experience. Voss looked up from her equipment briefly, meeting his gaze with the kind of neutral professionalism that neither invited further conversation nor discouraged it. "I'm familiar with training facilities," she said simply, then returned her attention to adjusting the settings on her tactical computer. The response was polite, but didn't provide the opening for extended conversation that Rodriguez had expected. In his experience, most personnel were eager to engage with someone of his rank and reputation, particularly when that person was offering what appeared to be helpful guidance. The lack of enthusiasm in Voss's response registered as either shyness or arrogance, and given his assessment of her background, he assumed the former. "Right," Rodriguez continued, undeterred by her subdued response. "Well, just so you know, today's exercises are focused on advanced urban warfare scenarios. Nothing too intense, but definitely more hands-on than what you'd typically encounter in administrative settings. If you need any clarification on procedures or equipment, feel free to ask." Whitfield had drifted over during this exchange, drawn by curiosity and the opportunity to demonstrate his own expertise to someone he assumed would be impressed by practical military knowledge. "Tommy's being modest," he interjected with a grin. "These scenarios are designed to simulate some pretty challenging tactical situations. We've been running variations of these exercises for months, so we've got the coordination down to a science." Voss finished her equipment adjustment and stood, shouldering her pack with movements that were economical and professional, but didn't display any particular urgency or concern about the upcoming exercises. "I'm sure you do," she said, her tone remaining neutral and conversational. Chun joined the group, completing their informal circle and adding his own perspective to what was becoming an impromptu orientation session. "The technology integration is probably the most challenging aspect," he explained, gesturing toward the various electronic systems visible throughout the training area. "We're using some pretty sophisticated communication and surveillance equipment. That requires coordination between multiple operators. Takes some getting used to if you haven't worked with real-time tactical systems before." The assumption underlying Chun's comment was that Voss's background would be primarily theoretical rather than practical, and that her familiarity with military technology would be limited to training manuals and classroom instruction rather than field experience. His tone was helpful but carried the implicit suggestion that he was explaining concepts that would be new to her. "Technology integration," Voss repeated thoughtfully, as if considering the phrase. That does sound challenging, Rodriguez interpreted. Her response as confirmation of their assessment regarding her inexperience with practical operations. Don't worry about it too much, he said reassuringly. Today's exercises are designed to be educational rather than evaluative. The important thing is to observe how the different components work together and maybe pick up some insights that might be useful in your regular duties. The patronizing undertone in his voice was probably unintentional, but it reflected his genuine belief that someone with Voss's apparent background would benefit from exposure to real military operations, even in a training environment. His confidence in this assessment was reinforced by the agreement he saw in Whitfield's and Chun's expressions. Educational, Voss said, and something in the way she pronounced the word suggested that she found the concept interesting, though not necessarily in the way Rodriguez intended. I'm always interested in learning new approaches to problem solving. Whitfield leaned forward slightly, warming to what he perceived as an opportunity to share professional insights with someone who would appreciate his expertise. The key to success in these scenarios is understanding how individual specialties integrate into overall mission effectiveness, he explained. My role as designated marksman, for instance, isn't just about accuracy, it's about providing overwatch and eliminating specific threats that could compromise the entire operation. Overwatch, Voss nodded, as if filing away a useful term. That makes sense. Eliminating threats before they can affect the broader mission. Chun couldn't resist adding his own contribution to what was becoming an impromptu tactical seminar. And the electronic warfare component is crucial for maintaining communication while disrupting enemy coordination, he said. Modern operations depend on information superiority, so controlling the electronic battlefield is often more important than pure firepower. Information superiority, Voss repeated, her voice carrying what might have been genuine interest or polite acknowledgement. I can see how that would be critical. The three soldiers were pleased with how the conversation was developing. From their perspective, they were providing valuable educational content to someone who clearly appreciated the opportunity to learn from experienced operators. Voss's responses suggested that she was absorbing their insights and developing a better understanding of practical military operations. Rodriguez decided to build on this apparent success by offering more specific guidance. When we start the actual exercises, you'll probably want to position yourself where you can observe the coordination between different elements, he suggested. The real learning happens when you see how individual actions contribute to achieving larger objectives. Observation positions, Voss said thoughtfully. Good advice. Whitfield was encouraged by her apparent receptiveness to instruction. And don't be surprised if things move faster than you expect, he added. Training scenarios are compressed compared to real operations, but the pace can still be overwhelming. If you're not used to rapid decision-making under pressure. Rapid decision-making, Voss acknowledged. I imagine that's something that improves with experience. Chun nodded enthusiastically, pleased to see that she was grasping the key concepts. Exactly. And experience is really the only way to develop the kind of instinctive responses that effective operations require. You can study tactics and procedures all you want, but there's no substitute for actually executing under realistic conditions. No substitute for execution, Voss agreed, and there was something in her tone that suggested deeper appreciation for the concept than Chen had expected. As the conversation continued, none of the three soldiers noticed the subtle shift in Voss's posture or the way her eyes had begun tracking movement throughout the facility with increased attention. They were too focused on their role as impromptu instructors to recognize that their audience might be evaluating them as much as they were evaluating her. The tactical computer on Voss's forearm had been quietly updating throughout their conversation, displaying information that remained hidden beneath her sleeve but which was providing her with real-time data about the facility's operational status. scheduled exercises, and personnel assignments. The device's capabilities extended far beyond what any of her new acquaintances would have suspected, just as her own background encompassed experiences that their imagination couldn't have encompassed. When the facility's public address system announced the beginning of the day's first training rotation, Rodriguez straightened with the kind of automatic response that came from years of military conditioning. "That's our cue," he said, his voice taking on the more formal tone appropriate for operational activities. "Time to show you how real soldiers handle complex tactical scenarios." Voss shouldered her pack and checked her equipment one final time, her movements displaying the same professional efficiency that had characterized her entire morning routine. "I'm looking forward to it," she said, and for the first time, there was something in her voice that suggested genuine anticipation rather than polite acknowledgement. As they moved toward the training areas, the three soldiers continued their commentary, pointing out significant equipment and explaining procedural details that they assumed would be new information for their observer. They had no way of knowing that the quiet staff sergeant walking beside them had not only participated in similar exercises, but had also designed many of the scenarios they were about to demonstrate, developed several of the tactics they planned to employ, and achieved operational results that had influenced military doctrine at the highest levels of command. The urban warfare simulation zone consisted of a 3-story concrete structure designed to replicate the kind of multi-level urban environment that had become the standard battlefield for modern military operations. The building's interior had been configured to represent a typical Middle Eastern residential complex, complete with narrow corridors, multiple entry points, and the kind of architectural features that created both tactical opportunities and deadly bottlenecks for advancing forces. Master Sergeant Patricia Knox stood at the simulation control station, her weathered hands moving across a bank of monitors that displayed feeds from dozens of cameras positioned throughout the training structure. At 46, Knox had supervised more training exercises than most soldiers participated in during entire careers, and her reputation for creating challenging, realistic scenarios had made the Fort Valdez TTC one of the most respected training facilities in the Pacific Command. Today's scenario involves a multi-floor clearance operation with unknown hostiles and potential civilian presence, Knox announced over the facility's intercom system. Teams will be evaluated on speed, accuracy, communication effectiveness, and adherence to rules of engagement. Electronic scoring will track all weapons discharge, movement patterns, and tactical decisions. Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of competitive energy that came with the announcement of a new training challenge. This was his element close-quarters combat in complex, urban terrain where his experience and instincts had consistently given him advantages over less experienced operators. He'd run similar scenarios dozens of times, accumulating enough successes to establish patterns and tactics that had proven effective across multiple variations. "Standard 3-man entry formation," Rodriguez said to his teammates, automatically assuming the leadership role that came naturally to him in tactical situations. "Whitfield, you'll take over watch position on the exterior to provide early warning and eliminate any threats that might compromise our entry. Chun, you'll handle communications and electronic surveillance once we're inside." The plan was solid, reflecting conventional military doctrine and the kind of tactical thinking that had served them well in previous exercises. Rodriguez would take point for the actual building clearance, using his close-quarters combat expertise to navigate the structure's hazards, while his teammates provided supporting capabilities from their specialized positions. Voss had been listening to their tactical discussion with the same neutral attention she'd shown throughout the morning. But when Knox asked for team assignments, she stepped forward with quiet confidence. "I'll run solo clearance," she said simply. The statement hung in the air for a moment, creating a small pocket of silence that suggested the three soldiers weren't quite sure they'd heard correctly. Solo clearance operations were typically reserved for the most experienced operators, and even then, they were considered high-risk exercises that required exceptional skill and extensive preparation. Rodriguez recovered first, his response carrying a note of concern that was probably genuine. "Are you sure about that? These scenarios can be pretty intense, and solo operations don't give you backup if things go wrong. Maybe it would be better to observe a few runs before jumping into something that challenging." Whitfield nodded agreement, his marksman's instincts making him naturally cautious about unnecessary risks. "The scoring system is set up for team operations," he added. "Solo runs are possible, but they're designed for operators with extensive urban warfare experience. It might not be the best way to get introduced to our training protocols." Chun's concern was more technical in nature. "The communication and electronic support systems are integrated for team coordination," he explained. "Running solo means you'll be operating without the technological advantages that make these scenarios manageable. That's a significant handicap for someone who isn't familiar with the facility's capabilities." Knox looked up from her control station, her expression suggesting that she was accustomed to dealing with personnel who overestimated their capabilities. "Staff Sergeant Voss, solo clearance operations require documented qualification in advanced urban warfare tactics. Do you have current certification for independent close quarters operations?" Voss reached into her tactical vest and produced a laminated card that she handed to Knox without comment. The training supervisor studied the document for several seconds, her eyebrows rising slightly as she read through the listed qualifications and authorization codes. "Well," Knox said finally, her tone shifting from skeptical to professionally neutral, "your certifications appear to be in order. Solo clearance is authorized if that's your preference." Rodriguez exchanged glances with his teammates, trying to process this unexpected development. The certifications Knox had mentioned weren't typically held by administrative personnel, and the casual way Voss had produced them suggested that she'd anticipated the question and come prepared with proper documentation. "Okay," Rodriguez said slowly, still trying to reconcile this new information with his assessment of Voss's background and experience. "But you should know that our team has run this particular scenario multiple times. We've got the timing down to where we can usually complete full clearance in under 12 minutes with zero rule of engagement violations." Voss nodded as if this information was useful but not particularly impressive. 12 minutes, she repeated thoughtfully. "That's a good baseline." Whitfield felt compelled to add more context that might help her understand the challenge she was accepting. "The scenario includes multiple hostile positions, civilian decoys, and booby trap simulations that can end your run instantly if you trigger them. It's not just about speed, you have to maintain tactical discipline throughout the entire operation." "Tactical discipline," Voss acknowledged, "definitely important." Chun decided to provide one final warning about the technical challenges she would face. "And remember, you'll be operating without communication support or electronic intelligence. The targeting system will track your every move, but you won't have real-time updates about threat positions or civilian locations like our team operations provide." "No real-time updates," Voss said, checking the settings on her tactical computer one more time. "I understand." Knox had finished entering Voss's information into the scoring system and was preparing to initialize the scenario. "Weapons are loaded with training ammunition and electronic scoring devices," she announced. "All safety protocols are in effect. Scenario begins on my signal." Rodriguez positioned his team at their standard entry point, running through final equipment checks and communication protocols with the smooth efficiency of operators who'd worked together extensively. Their confidence was high, they dominated this particular scenario consistently, and today's run would provide an excellent opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities to the observer, who would soon understand the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical expertise. Voss moved to the solo entry point, A different location that would require her to navigate the building without the support and coordination that made team operations more manageable. She checked her weapons and equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown throughout the morning. But there was something different in her demeanor, now a subtle shift toward a more focused, operational mindset that suggested she was transitioning from observer to participant. "Both teams ready?" Knox called from the control station. "Ready," Rodriguez responded for his team. "Ready," Vos said simply. Knox's hand moved to the control panel, and the simulation environment transformed from a training facility into an active operational zone. Interior lighting shifted to create realistic shadows and visibility challenges. Sound effects began playing through hidden speakers to simulate the ambient noise of an urban environment, and electronic systems activated to create the kind of technological environment that characterized modern warfare. "Scenario is live," Knox announced. "Clock starts now." Rodriguez led his team through their entry sequence with practiced efficiency, each member moving to predetermined positions and beginning the systematic clearance process they'd refined through extensive repetition. Their coordination was excellent, their communication crisp and professional, and their tactical execution reflected genuine competence and experience. But from her monitoring position, Knox found herself focusing increasingly on the feeds from Vos's solo operation. The staff sergeant was moving through the building with a fluidity and confidence that seemed inconsistent with someone participating in her first training exercise at this facility. Her movement patterns showed tactical sophistication that typically required extensive specialized training, and her decision-making reflected an understanding of urban warfare principles that went far beyond what administrative personnel normally possessed. More significantly, Vos was moving fast, not with the reckless speed of someone trying to set records, but with the kind of efficient progression that came from knowing exactly what needed to be accomplished and having the skills to accomplish it without wasted motion or unnecessary caution. 7 minutes into the exercise, Knox's communication system crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Control, this is Solo. Simulation complete. Building secure. All hostiles neutralized. All civilians protected. Requesting clearance to exit." Knox stared at her monitoring displays, running diagnostic checks on the electronic scoring system to verify what her instruments were telling her. 7 minutes wasn't just fast for a solo clearance operation. It was approaching the theoretical minimum time required to physically traverse the building's multiple levels while conducting even the most cursory security sweep. Yet the camera feeds showed clear evidence that Vos had conducted a thorough, methodical clearance that met or exceeded all tactical requirements. "Solo operator, please remain in position for verification," Knox announced, her voice carrying the carefully controlled tone of someone trying to process unexpected information while maintaining professional composure. "I need to confirm scoring accuracy before authorizing your exit." Rodriguez and his team were still working through the middle section of the building, their progress steady but conventional as they cleared rooms with a systematic approach that prioritized safety and thoroughness over speed. Their communication chatter continued over the facility's monitoring system, displaying the kind of professional coordination that had consistently earned them high ratings in previous exercises. Knox pulled up the detailed scoring breakdown for Vos's run, examining data that tracked everything from weapon accuracy to movement efficiency to adherence to rules of engagement. The numbers were extraordinary, perfect scores across all categories, with completion times that challenged the fundamental assumptions about what was possible for solo operations in complex urban environments. Rodriguez's team, be advised that solo operator has completed scenario, Knox announced over the training frequency. Continue your exercise for full evaluation. The transmission created a moment of confused silence on the team channel before Rodriguez's voice crackled back through the speakers. "Control, please confirm. Did you say solo operator completed the full scenario? Confirmed, Knox replied. Solo clearance complete in 7 minutes, 12 seconds. All objectives achieved with perfect scores. Inside the simulation building, Rodriguez paused his advance to process this information. 7 minutes was impossible, not just unlikely or impressive, but actually impossible for anyone operating according to standard tactical doctrine. The building's layout required a minimum traversal time that alone should have consumed most of that period, leaving insufficient time for the careful room-by-room clearance that the scenario demanded. Control, requesting confirmation of scenario. Parameters, Whitfield's voice joined the conversation. Are we running the same exercise as solo operator? Identical parameters, Knox confirmed. Same building configuration, same hostile positions, same civilian placement, same electronic countermeasures. Chun's voice carried a note of skepticism that reflected his technical background and natural inclination to question anomalous data. Control, recommend equipment check on solo operators scoring transmitters. Those numbers suggest possible malfunction in the electronic monitoring system. Knox had already considered that possibility and run comprehensive diagnostics on all systems. All equipment functioning normally, she reported. Solo operators' performance metrics are verified and accurate. The training supervisor found herself in the unusual position of having to defend scoring results that challenged her own understanding of what constituted realistic performance expectations. In 15 years of running exercises at Fort Valdez, she'd never seen anything approaching Voss's combination of speed and precision, and she was beginning to wonder if there were aspects of the staff sergeant's background that weren't reflected in her standard personnel file. Meanwhile, Voss remained in position at the building's exit point, waiting for authorization to complete her exercise. Her breathing was steady and controlled, showing no signs of the exertion that should have resulted from rapid movement through a challenging tactical environment. Her equipment remained perfectly organized, her weapon properly secured, and her overall demeanor suggested that the exercise had required effort but hadn't pushed her to her operational limits. As she waited, Voss made minor adjustments to her tactical computer, updating settings and reviewing data displays with the casual attention of someone performing routine maintenance rather than analyzing critical operational information. The device on her forearm continued its quiet operation, processing and recording information that extended far beyond the parameters of the training exercise. The digital counter embedded in the device's display had remained constant throughout the morning, showing the same sequence of numbers that had been visible when she first arrived at the facility. But now, as she completed her post-exercise equipment check, the display flickered briefly and updated. The change was subtle, just a single-digit increment in a string of numbers that would have meant nothing to most observers. But it represented something far more significant than routine data logging. Rodriguez's team emerged from the simulation building 12 minutes and 47 seconds after beginning their exercise, their time well within normal parameters. For experienced operators running a coordinated team clearance, their performance had been solid and professional, meeting all tactical requirements and demonstrating the kind of competence that had consistently earned them recognition as one of Fort Valdez's premier training units. "Good run," Rodriguez said to his teammates as they moved through their post-exercise procedures. "Clean execution, no violations, solid time. Should be enough to maintain our ranking." But their satisfaction with their performance was complicated by the knowledge that someone had somehow achieved dramatically superior results, using a more challenging operational approach. The mathematics didn't seem to work. Solo operations were inherently more difficult and time-consuming than team efforts. Yet Voss had completed the identical scenario in nearly half their time while achieving perfect scores. Knox completed her final verification checks and authorized Voss to exit the simulation building. "Solo operator is cleared to exit." Report to debrief station for performance analysis. Voss emerged from the building with the same calm professionalism she'd displayed throughout the morning, showing no obvious signs of satisfaction or excitement about her exceptional performance. She moved through the required post-exercise procedures with methodical efficiency, checking equipment, securing weapons, and completing paperwork with the same attention to detail she'd shown during her initial preparation. As she worked through these routine tasks, the three soldiers who had earlier positioned themselves as her informal instructors found themselves struggling to reconcile what they'd witnessed with their understanding of military capabilities and tactical possibilities. Their confidence in their own assessment of her background and experience was beginning to show cracks, though they hadn't yet abandoned their fundamental assumptions about what her performance meant. Maybe the scenario was modified for solo operators, Whitfield suggested, his voice carrying the uncertain tone of someone trying to explain anomalous data. Different threat placement or simplified objectives to account for reduced operational capability. Chun nodded, grasping for technical explanations that might restore logical order to the situation. Or equipment advantages we're not aware of. Enhanced communication systems or tactical support that provided her with information we didn't have access to. Rodriguez remained silent, his tactical instincts telling him that something significant had just occurred, but his analytical framework lacking the context necessary to understand what that something might be. The performance he'd witnessed didn't fit any of his categories for evaluating military competence, and the disconnect between expectation and reality was forcing him to question assumptions he'd never previously examined. Knox finished reviewing the exercise data and prepared to begin her standard post-exercise briefing. But as she organized her materials, she found herself paying particular attention to Voss's performance metrics and wondering whether she should request additional information about the staff, sergeant's background and previous assignments. The morning's training had produced results that challenged conventional understanding of what was possible within the parameters of the exercises, and Knox's experience told her that such anomalies usually indicated the presence of factors that weren't immediately apparent. The question was whether those factors represented equipment capabilities, operational techniques, or simply individual competence that exceeded normal expectations. As the participants prepared for their debrief session, Voss continued her equipment maintenance routine, making final adjustments to her tactical computer, and reviewing data that remained hidden from the others present. The device's operations extended far beyond simple training exercise monitoring, and the information it was processing represented connections to operational realities that none of her morning companions could have imagined. The counter display flickered once more, updating its tally with the same quiet precision that had characterized all of Voss's activities since arriving at Fort Valdez. The numbers meant nothing to anyone who might glimpse them, but they represented achievements that had influenced military operations at the highest levels of command and shaped tactical doctrine in ways that most personnel would never know or understand. Lieutenant Colonel Rivera stepped through the main entrance of the tactical training complex at precisely 9:30, her arrival timed to coincide with the completion of the morning's first exercise rotation. At 48, Rivera moved with the controlled precision of someone who had spent nearly 3 decades navigating the complex intersection of military operations and classified intelligence activities. Her uniform was immaculate but functional, bearing the subtle indicators of someone whose career had encompassed assignments that didn't appear in official personnel records. Rivera's presence at Fort Valdez wasn't routine. As Deputy Commander of Pacific Theater Special Operations, her direct involvement in training facility activities typically indicated either significant problems, requiring high-level intervention, or developments of strategic importance that demanded immediate attention from someone with appropriate security clearances and operational experience. Today's visit had been scheduled with minimal advance notice and classified at levels that restricted information access to personnel with specific authorization codes. She carried a tablet computer that maintained encrypted connections to databases and communication networks unavailable to standard military systems, and her security clearances provided access to information that intersected with some of the most sensitive operational programs in the contemporary military structure. Her assignment to review training activities at Valdez had been triggered by automated alerts from systems that monitored performance anomalies and flagged results requiring evaluation by personnel with specialized knowledge. Knox spotted Rivera immediately and moved to intercept her before she could begin her facility inspection. The training supervisor had been anticipating this visit ever since the morning's exercise results had generated automatic reports to higher command levels, though she hadn't expected someone of Rivera's rank and background to respond personally to what appeared to be routine performance monitoring. "Colonel Rivera," Knox said, offering a crisp salute that Rivera returned with the automatic precision of long military conditioning. "I have the exercise summaries ready for your review." This morning's results included some performance metrics that exceeded normal parameters. Rivera accepted the tablet that Knox offered, scanning the preliminary data with the rapid comprehension of someone accustomed to processing large volumes of technical information under time constraints. Her expression remained neutral as she reviewed the scores, but her eyes paused at specific data points that suggested she was looking for particular indicators rather than simply conducting general performance evaluation. "Staff Sergeant Voss," Rivera said, her voice carefully controlled. "Is she still on the premises?" "Yes, ma'am," Knox replied. "Currently completing post-exercise procedures in debrief Area 3. Her performance this morning was ... unusual." Rivera's attention sharpened at Knox's choice of words. Unusual how? Knox struggled to find appropriate language to describe results that challenged her understanding of tactical possibilities. Solo clearance operation completed in 7 minutes. 12 seconds with perfect scores across all evaluation categories. Performance metrics that exceed theoretical optimums for the scenario parameters. Rivera studied the detailed breakdown of Voss's performance, her examination focusing on specific data elements that weren't included in standard training evaluations. Hidden within the routine scoring information were embedded codes and reference numbers that connected to operational databases maintained by intelligence services and special operations commands. Were there any equipment irregularities or scoring malfunctions? Rivera asked, though her tone suggested she already knew what the answer would be. "All systems function normally," Knox confirmed. "I ran comprehensive diagnostics on all monitoring equipment. The performance data is accurate and verified." Rivera nodded slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align in her mind. Her visit to Fort Valdez had been prompted by automated alerts from systems that tracked the activities of personnel with specific operational backgrounds, and the morning's exercise results had triggered multiple flags in databases that monitored individuals whose capabilities extended far beyond their apparent assignments. "I'll need to speak with Staff Sergeant Voss privately," Rivera said. "Is there a secure conference room available?" Knox gestured toward the administrative section of the facility. "Conference Room 7 has appropriate security protocols and electronic isolation. I can have it prepared immediately." As Rivera moved toward the administrative area, her attention was drawn to a commotion near the equipment area where Rodriguez, Whitfield, and Chen were engaged in animated discussion with other personnel who had observed the morning's exercises. Their voices carried the frustrated tone of people trying to reconcile conflicting information, and their body language suggested confusion rather than anger. Equipment advantages or scenario modifications," Chen was saying, his technical background leading him to search for systematic explanations for anomalous results. "There has to be some factor we're not aware of that accounts for the performance differential." Rodriguez shook his head, his tactical experience making him resistant to purely technical explanations. I watched the camera feeds. She was running standard equipment, same scenario parameters we used. No obvious advantages that would account for that kind of time differential. Whitfield's marksman training had taught him to observe details that others might miss, and his analysis was more specific than his teammates'. Her movement patterns were wrong for someone learning the facility layout. She navigated like someone who already knew the building configuration and optimal approaches. For each section, Rivera paused to listen to their discussion, recognizing the kind of analytical thinking that characterized competent military personnel encountering situations that challenged their operational framework. Their confusion was understandable. They were applying conventional assessment criteria to evaluate performance that operated according to different standards entirely. But more significantly, their observations were providing additional confirmation of what Rivera had already begun to suspect based on the automated alerts that had triggered her visit to Fort Valdez. The morning's exercise results weren't anomalous performance by an unusually capable administrative officer. They were evidence that someone with exceptional operational background was operating under administrative cover for reasons that required immediate investigation. Rivera's tablet chimed softly, indicating receipt of new information from the secure databases she'd been monitoring throughout her drive to the facility. The message contained updated intelligence that confirmed her suspicions and provided context that transformed the morning's events from curious training anomalies into matters of significant strategic importance. The encrypted communication included photographs, operational summaries, and classification codes that connected Voss's presence at Fort Valdez to ongoing intelligence operations in multiple theaters. The information painted a picture of someone whose actual background bore no resemblance to her apparent administrative assignment, and whose capabilities had been demonstrated in operational environments far more challenging than any training facility. Rivera closed the message and secured her tablet, her expression remaining carefully neutral, despite the significance of what she'd just learned. The morning's exercise results weren't surprising when viewed in the context of Voss's actual operational history, but her presence at Fort Valdez raised questions about mission parameters and security protocols that required immediate clarification. "Knox," Rivera called, summoning the training supervisor with the tone of someone whose priorities had just shifted significantly. "I need that secure conference room prepared immediately. And I'll require privacy for an extended discussion with Staff Sergeant Voss." Knox nodded and moved to implement Rivera's instructions, though her expression suggested she was beginning to understand that the morning's unusual exercise results were connected to larger issues that extended far beyond routine training evaluation. The level of attention that Voss's performance had attracted indicated involvement in matters that wouldn't normally intersect with standard facility operations. As Rivera waited for the conference room to be prepared, she observed Voss completing her post-exercise procedures with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized her entire morning at the facility. There was nothing in her demeanor that suggested awareness of the attention her performance had attracted or concern about the high-level scrutiny that was now focused on her activities. But Rivera's trained eye noticed subtle indicators that confirmed what her intelligence briefings had suggested. Voss's equipment maintenance routine included checks and adjustments that weren't part of standard procedures. Her situational awareness encompassed details that most personnel wouldn't consider relevant, and her overall approach to training facility operations reflected experience with environments where such attention to detail could be matters of life and death. Most significantly, the tactical computer strapped to Voss's forearm was receiving and processing information that extended far beyond the parameters of training exercises. Rivera could see the device's activity indicators from across the room, and her familiarity with specialized equipment allowed her to recognize capabilities that weren't available to conventional military personnel. The morning's events were beginning to form a pattern that Rivera recognized from her experience with classified operations and personnel whose official assignments provided cover for activities that couldn't be acknowledged through normal administrative channels. The question was whether Voss's presence at Fort Valdez represented routine operational security or indicated developments that required immediate intervention from someone with appropriate authority and security clearances. Rivera's tablet chimed. Again, this time with a priority message that carried classification codes requiring immediate attention. The communication contained instructions that clarified her mission parameters and provided authorization for actions that would transform a routine training facility visit into something considerably more significant and complex. Rivera approached Voss directly, bypassing the normal protocol of working through facility supervisors when addressing personnel of lower rank. The decision reflected both the urgency of her mission and her understanding that conventional military hierarchy didn't apply to the situation she was investigating. As she drew closer, Rivera could see details that confirmed what her classified briefings had suggested about Voss's actual background and operational status. "Staff Sergeant Voss," Rivera said, her voice carrying the tone of professional recognition rather than routine command authority. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rivera, Pacific Theater Special Operations. I need to speak with you privately about this." Morning's exercise results. Voss looked up from her equipment checklist, meeting Rivera's gaze with the kind of direct attention that suggested she'd been expecting this conversation. There was no surprise in her expression, no confusion about why a senior officer with Rivera's background would be interested in routine training activities. Instead, her demeanor shifted subtly toward a more formal operational posture that indicated awareness of the security implications surrounding their interaction. "Yes, ma'am," Voss replied, securing her equipment with movements that were both efficient and deliberate. "I'm available for discussion at your convenience." Rivera gestured toward the administrative section where Knox had prepared the secure conference room. "We'll use conference room 7. What we discuss will be classified at levels that require appropriate containment protocols." As they walked toward the administrative area, Rivera observed Voss's movement patterns and situational awareness with the trained eye of someone who understood the subtle indicators that distinguished routine military personnel from those with specialized operational experience. Voss maintained optimal positioning relative to potential threats, tracked personnel movement throughout the facility, and demonstrated the kind of comprehensive environmental monitoring that characterized individuals trained for high-risk operations. Secure conference room had been configured with electronic isolation protocols that prevented monitoring or recording of conversations, and Rivera verified the security systems before beginning their discussion. The precautions weren't routine for training facility operations, but they were essential for conversations involving personnel whose actual assignments might be classified at levels requiring special protection. "Your performance this morning generated automatic alerts in multiple intelligence databases," Rivera began, consulting her tablet for specific information codes. 7 minutes, 12 seconds for solo urban clearance isn't just exceptional, it approaches theoretical limits for the scenario parameters. That kind of performance suggests operational experience significantly beyond what your current assignment would indicate. Voss nodded, confirming Rivera's assessment without providing additional details. The scenario was well designed but represented familiar operational challenges. Rivera studied the tactical computer strapped to Voss's forearm, recognizing equipment specifications that weren't available through normal military supply channels. "That's a Nexus 7 tactical system with enhanced processing and classified communication capabilities. Standard issue for specific special operations units, but not typically assigned to administrative personnel." The equipment was issued for my current operational parameters, Voss replied, her tone remaining professionally neutral while acknowledging Rivera's technical knowledge. Rivera pulled up additional information on her tablet, accessing files. That required multiple security authorizations and contained operational details from classified missions spanning several years. The data painted a comprehensive picture of someone whose actual military service bore no resemblance to her apparent administrative assignment at Fort Valdez. Operation Desert Mirage, 18 months ago, Rivera said, reading from encrypted files that contained mission summaries and personnel evaluations. 3-person reconnaissance team eliminated an entire terrorist cell while gathering intelligence on weapons smuggling networks. Team leader achieved perfect mission success with 0 friendly casualties and complete operational security. Voss's expression remained controlled, but Rivera could see the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated recognition of information that was supposed to remain classified at the highest levels. The operation Rivera had referenced was one of dozens that had contributed to Voss's actual service record and operational reputation. Operation Crimson Shore, 14 months ago, Rivera continued. Solo infiltration and elimination of high-value targets in urban environment, similar to this morning's training scenario. Mission completed in record time with tactical excellence. That established new benchmarks for similar operations. The details Rivera was accessing represented operational achievements that had influenced strategic planning and tactical doctrine at levels far above normal military operations. Each mission summary represented capabilities that extended well beyond what conventional training could produce, and the cumulative record painted a picture of someone whose skills had been tested and proven in the most challenging operational environments. Your current assignment at Fort Valdez is classified as administrative support, Rivera said, looking up from her tablet to study Voss's reaction. But your actual operational status is deep cover intelligence gathering for Pacific Theater Command. You're here to evaluate training effectiveness and identify potential security vulnerabilities that might compromise future operations. Voss maintained her professional composure, but her slight nod confirmed Rivera's assessment of her mission parameters. My assignment includes multiple objectives that require extended observation of facility operations and personnel capabilities, Rivera checked her tablet again, this time accessing real-time intelligence that had been updated throughout the morning based on automated monitoring of Voss's activities at the training facility. The data included analysis of her exercise performance, equipment usage, and interaction patterns with facility personnel. The tactical computer you're carrying has been recording detailed performance metrics and environmental data since you arrived this morning, Rivera said. The information you're gathering will be used to evaluate training protocols and identify personnel with potential for advanced operational assignments. The statement revealed the larger context for Voss's presence at Fort Valdez and explained why her performance had triggered high-level attention from intelligence monitoring systems. Her mission wasn't simply administrative review, it was operational assessment with strategic implications for military training and personnel development programs. The counter display on your equipment, Rivera continued, studying the device with professional interest. That's tracking more than just training exercise data. It's maintaining operational tallies from your classified mission history. Voss glanced at the tactical computer's display, where the digital counter continued its quiet monitoring of information that represented achievements spanning multiple years of special operations service. The numbers that updated periodically weren't training scores, they were operational metrics that tracked real-world mission results with strategic significance. The device maintains comprehensive records of all operational activities, Voss confirmed. Current assignment parameters require documentation that will support evaluation of training effectiveness and personnel development potential. Rivera nodded, Understanding both the technical capabilities of Voss's equipment and the strategic importance of the information it was collecting. The morning's exercise results weren't anomalous performance by administrative personnel. They were demonstration of capabilities that had been proven in operational environments, where failure meant considerably more than poor training scores. Rodriguez, Whitfield, and Chun, Rivera said, referring to the three soldiers who had observed Voss's performance with confusion and skepticism. Their reaction to your exercise results provides valuable intelligence about base personnel's ability to recognize exceptional operational capabilities when they encounter them. The observation highlighted one of the strategic purposes behind Voss's assignment, evaluating whether existing training programs were producing personnel capable of identifying and respecting exceptional military competence regardless of apparent rank or assignment. The morning's interactions had provided clear evidence that conventional military training could create blind spots that might compromise operational effectiveness. Your mission parameters include continued observation for an additional 72 hours, Rivera said, consulting updated instructions that had been transmitted during their conversation. Higher command wants comprehensive evaluation of facility operations and personnel before finalizing recommendations for program modifications. Voss acknowledged the extended timeline with the same professional acceptance she'd shown throughout their discussion. Her assignment at Fort Valdez represented only one component of larger intelligence gathering efforts that would influence training and operational policies across multiple commands. Rivera prepared to conclude their conversation, but first she needed to address the immediate situation created by the morning's exercise results and the attention they had attracted from facility personnel. Your performance this morning was necessarily exceptional to fulfill mission requirements, but it's created questions that require careful management to maintain operational security. The challenge was balancing Voss's need to complete her intelligence gathering mission with the requirement to avoid compromising the classified nature of her actual background and capabilities. The solution would require coordination between facility leadership and higher command to ensure that security protocols were maintained while allowing Voss to continue her essential work. Rivera and Voss emerged from the secure conference room to find the main training area buzzing with subdued conversation as personnel tried to process the morning's unexpected events. Knox had maintained operational discipline, but the extraordinary exercise results had created an atmosphere of curiosity and speculation that was affecting the facility's normal routine. Rivera recognized that the situation required immediate clarification to maintain both operational security and training facility effectiveness. "Master Sergeant Knox," Rivera called, her voice carrying the authority of someone prepared to address the confusion that was disrupting normal operations. "Please assemble all personnel who observed this morning's urban warfare exercise. I need to provide context for the performance metrics that have generated questions." Knox moved efficiently to comply with Rivera's instructions, using the facility's intercom system to request the presence of specific personnel in the main briefing area. Within minutes, Rodriguez, Whitfield, Chun, and several other soldiers had gathered in the designated space, their expressions showing a mixture of curiosity and professional attention that indicated awareness they were about to receive information that would explain the morning's anomalous events. Rivera positioned herself at the front of the assembled group, with Voss standing slightly to one side in a position that suggested professional collaboration rather than the subordinate relationship that most personnel would have expected based on their respective apparent ranks. The arrangement itself provided the first subtle indication that the standard assumptions about hierarchy and capability might not apply to the situation they were about to have explained. This morning's training exercise produced performance results that exceeded normal parameters. Rivera began, her tone carrying the measured authority of someone delivering information that was both significant and carefully controlled. "Staff, Sergeant Voss completed a solo urban clearance operation in 7 minutes and 12 seconds, with perfect scores across all evaluation categories. These results have generated questions about equipment, procedures, and the possibility of scoring malfunctions. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that his team's 12-minute completion time was being used as a baseline for comparison with performance that had seemed impossible when they first learned about it. The formal presentation of the data made the disparity even more stark and challenging to their understanding of tactical possibilities. All equipment functioned normally, Rivera continued, addressing the technical concerns that Chen had raised earlier. The scenario parameters were identical for both solo and team operations, with no modifications or advantages that would account for the performance differential. The results are accurate and verified through multiple independent monitoring systems. Whitfield found his voice first, though his question carried the uncertain tone of someone whose analytical framework was being challenged by information that didn't fit established patterns. Ma'am, with respect, those completion times approach theoretical minimums for the physical traversal of the building structure. Even without conducting tactical clearance procedures, the movement requirements alone should have consumed most of that time period. Rivera nodded, acknowledging the validity of his observation while preparing to provide context that would explain how such performance was not only possible, but actually routine for personnel with appropriate background and training. Sergeant Whitfield raises an important point about theoretical limitations and performance expectations. The key to understanding this morning's results lies in recognizing that theoretical limitations are based on assumptions about training, experience, and operational capability. She gestured toward Voss, who maintained her professional posture, while allowing Rivera to control the information disclosure process. Staff Sergeant Voss is not assigned to Fort Valdez for administrative support duties, despite what her official personnel records indicate. Her actual assignment is classified intelligence gathering for Pacific Theater Special Operations Command. The statement created a moment of complete silence as the assembled personnel processed information that fundamentally altered their understanding of the morning's events and their interactions with someone they had categorized as inexperienced. Administrative personnel. Rodriguez felt his certainty about his assessment capabilities beginning to dissolve as he realized how completely wrong his initial evaluation had been. Staff Sergeant Voss has operational experience with the 7th Special Activities Division, a unit that conducts classified missions in hostile environments where conventional military approaches are insufficient. Rivera continued, consulting her tablet for specific details that she was authorized to share. Her background includes deep insertion operations, solo elimination missions, and intelligence gathering activities in some of the most challenging operational environments in contemporary military conflicts. Chun stared at Voss with new understanding, recognizing that his assumptions about her technical competence had been based on incomplete information and biased evaluation criteria. The woman he had dismissed as unfamiliar with sophisticated military technology actually operated equipment and systems that exceeded his own technical expertise by significant margins. The tactical computer that Staff Sergeant Voss carries tracks operational metrics from classified missions spanning the past 4 years, Rivera explained, indicating the device that had been partially visible throughout the morning but whose significance had been completely misunderstood by casual observers. The digital counter that updates periodically doesn't record training scores. It maintains tallies of confirmed operational eliminations achieved during real-world missions. The revelation hit the assembled personnel with the force of complete paradigm shift. The device they had assumed was standard navigation and communication equipment was actually recording lethal effectiveness in operational environments where success was measured in terms of strategic objectives achieved and enemy capabilities eliminated. The current count stands at 47 confirmed eliminations. Rivera said, reading from classified data that she was authorized to share for educational purposes. Each number represents a successful mission where Staff Sergeant Voss eliminated specific targets while maintaining operational security and achieving strategic objectives that have influenced military operations across multiple theaters. Rodriguez felt his understanding of military competence and operational effectiveness undergo fundamental reconstruction as he realized that the quiet woman they had dismissed as administratively assigned had actually achieved operational results that exceeded anything in his own experience or that of most personnel he had encountered during his entire military career. Operation Thunder Valley, 16 months ago, Rivera continued, providing specific examples that illustrated the scope of Voss's actual military service. Solo infiltration of terrorist training facility resulted in elimination of 12 high-value targets and acquisition of intelligence that prevented 3 separate planned attacks against American interests. Whitfield's marksman training had taught him to appreciate precision and effectiveness, but the operational achievements Rivera was describing represented capabilities that extended far beyond anything he had imagined possible for individual operators. His own confirmed eliminations, which he had considered significant achievements, seemed almost insignificant compared to the operational record being revealed. Operation Desert Storm, 11 months ago, Rivera added. Staff Sergeant Voss eliminated an entire enemy command structure while extracting captured American personnel from a fortified compound. Mission success rate, 100%. Friendly casualties, 0. Strategic impact, disruption of enemy operations across an entire regional network. Chun realized that his evaluation of Voss's technical competence had been not just wrong, but embarrassingly inappropriate. Someone with her operational background would necessarily possess technological expertise that exceeded his own by orders of magnitude, and her familiarity with sophisticated systems would encompass capabilities he had never encountered. The reason Staff Sergeant Voss is assigned to Fort Valdez, Rivera explained, bringing the revelation to its culmination, is to evaluate training effectiveness and identify personnel with potential for advanced operational assignments. Her mission includes assessment of facility security, evaluation of training protocols, and analysis of how well current programs prepare personnel to recognize and respect exceptional military competence when they encounter it. The final piece of information completed the educational process that had begun with the morning's exercise results. The 3 soldiers who had positioned themselves as informal instructors for someone they assumed needed their guidance had actually been providing intelligence data about their own capabilities and limitations to someone whose mission included evaluating their potential for assignments requiring higher levels of operational sophistication. Rivera concluded her briefing by addressing the broader implications of the morning's events. This situation provides valuable lessons about assumptions, evaluation criteria, and the importance of maintaining professional respect for all personnel, regardless of apparent assignment or rank. Military effectiveness can't always be assessed through conventional criteria, and the most dangerous operators are often those who don't need to advertise their capabilities. The assembled personnel stood in stunned silence, processing information that had completely transformed their understanding of the morning's events and their own place in the military hierarchy. The lesson was comprehensive, humbling, and would undoubtedly influence their approach to evaluating personnel and assessing capability for years to come. Rivera allowed the silence to extend for several moments, understanding that the personnel before her needed time to process information that had fundamentally challenged their understanding of military operations, professional assessment, and their own place in the broader spectrum of military capability. The revelation about Voss's actual background had created cognitive dissonance that required careful management to transform into meaningful learning rather than simple embarrassment or defensive reactions. The events of this morning illustrate principles that extend far beyond specific individuals or particular training facilities. Rivera began, her tone shifting from informational briefing to educational instruction. What happened here represents patterns that occur throughout military service and more broadly, throughout professional and personal interactions, where people make judgments about capability based on limited information. Rodriguez found himself struggling with the recognition that his confidence in his assessment abilities had been not just wrong but systematically flawed in ways that suggested deeper problems with his approach to evaluating personnel. The realization was uncomfortable, but necessary, representing the kind of professional growth that separated competent soldiers from truly effective military leaders. Each of you applied evaluation criteria that seemed logical and appropriate based on your experience and training. Rivera continued, acknowledging the rationality of their initial assessments while preparing to explain why those criteria had proven inadequate. Age, gender, apparent assignment, and visible equipment all suggested conclusions about capability that felt reasonable and well-founded. Whitfield nodded reluctantly, recognizing that his analytical approach had followed patterns that he'd always considered professionally sound. His marksman training had taught him to observe details and draw logical conclusions from available evidence, but the morning's events had demonstrated that his observational framework contained blind spots that could lead to catastrophically wrong assessments. But military service teaches us that the most critical capabilities are often invisible to casual observation, Rivera said, drawing on decades of experience with personnel whose effectiveness couldn't be measured through conventional metrics. The quiet confidence that comes from proven competence doesn't need to announce itself. The most lethal operators rarely advertise their lethality. The most experienced personnel often appear unremarkable until circumstances require them to demonstrate skills that exceed normal expectations. Chun felt the weight of recognition as he understood how his technical expertise had created overconfidence in his ability to assess others' capabilities. His familiarity with sophisticated systems had led him to assume that technological competence was easily recognizable. But Voss's equipment had been operating at levels he hadn't even suspected throughout their entire interaction. This principle extends beyond military service into every professional environment, where people work together toward common objectives. Rivera explained, broadening the lesson's application beyond the specific context of Fort Valdez. In corporate settings, the quiet administrative assistant might be a former CEO gathering intelligence about organizational effectiveness. In academic environments, the unassuming graduate student might be conducting research that will influence policy at national levels. In community organizations, the person who seems to be simply volunteering might bring expertise that could transform entire programs. The universality of the lesson was beginning to resonate with the assembled personnel as they recognized parallels in their own experiences outside military service. Each of them could remember encounters where initial impressions had proven inadequate or where someone had surprised them with unexpected capabilities or knowledge. The danger of assessment based on surface characteristics becomes more serious when the stakes are higher. Rivera continued, connecting their morning's experience to operational realities where misjudgment could have strategic consequences. In combat situations, underestimating allies can lead to missed opportunities for tactical advantage. Overestimating enemies based on appearance can result in resource misallocation. Most critically, failing to recognize exceptional capability when it's available can mean not utilizing assets that could determine mission success or failure. Rodriguez understood that the lesson extended to his role as a team leader and his responsibility for recognizing and developing the potential of personnel under his command. His experience with conventional infantry operations had given him valuable expertise, but it had also created limitations in his ability to identify and appreciate different types of military excellence. Professional humility becomes essential when we recognize that our assessment frameworks are necessarily limited by our own experience and perspective. Rivera said, addressing the psychological aspects of the lesson that would determine whether the morning's events resulted in lasting behavioral change or simply temporary embarrassment. Acknowledging the limits of our judgment doesn't diminish our own competence. It enhances our effectiveness by making us more accurate in our evaluations and more respectful in our interactions. Whitfield realized that his precision shooting expertise had taught him the importance of accounting for variables that weren't immediately apparent, but he hadn't applied the same analytical rigor to evaluating human capabilities. Environmental factors, equipment specifications, and operational conditions all influenced marksmanship performance in ways that weren't obvious without detailed investigation, and personnel assessment required similar attention to hidden variables. The most effective military units are those where personnel understand that exceptional capability can emerge from unexpected sources, Rivera explained, drawing on her experience with special operations where unconventional approaches and diverse expertise often provided decisive advantages. Teams that maintain openness to being surprised by their own members' capabilities consistently outperform groups that operate according to rigid hierarchies based on apparent qualifications. Chun began to understand how his technological perspective could be enhanced by greater appreciation for human factors that couldn't be quantified through technical specifications. The most sophisticated systems required operators whose effectiveness depended on experience, intuition, and adaptability that couldn't be programmed or predicted through conventional analysis. Respect becomes the foundation for effective collaboration. When we acknowledge that we're working with people whose full capabilities may not be immediately apparent, Rivera said, connecting the morning's lesson to practical principles that would improve their effectiveness in future military operations. Professional courtesy isn't just about maintaining discipline. It's about creating environments where exceptional talent feels safe to emerge and contribute to mission success. The lesson was particularly relevant in contemporary military operations, where success increasingly depended on integration between conventional forces and specialized units whose capabilities and methods might not be familiar to traditional military personnel. Understanding and respecting differences in approach and background had become essential for achieving strategic objectives. Staff Sergeant Voss's assignment here represents larger patterns in modern military operations where traditional boundaries between roles and responsibilities are becoming less rigid. Rivera explained, providing context for understanding how the morning's events reflected broader changes in military structure and operational philosophy. Personnel may be assigned duties that don't reflect their full capabilities for reasons related to operational security, mission requirements, or strategic objectives that aren't apparent at facility level. Rodriguez recognized that effective leadership required developing sensitivity to these hidden complexities and maintaining openness to discovering unexpected resources within his own teams. The assumption that he understood everything about his personnel's backgrounds and capabilities had been proven dangerously wrong, and future effectiveness would depend on approaching personnel evaluation with greater humility and curiosity. Counter on Staff Sergeant Voss's equipment will continue updating as she completes her mission here, Rivera concluded, returning to the specific context while emphasizing the ongoing nature of the lesson they had learned. Each increment represents not just operational success, but also validation of approaches to military service that prioritize substance over appearance, effectiveness over recognition, and results over reputation. The assembled personnel stood quietly, understanding that they had received education that would influence their approach to military service and professional relationships for the remainder of their careers. The lesson was comprehensive, practical, and immediately applicable to situations they would encounter throughout their continued military development. As Rivera concluded her briefing, the training facility gradually returned to its normal operational rhythm, but the atmosphere had been permanently altered by the morning's revelations. Personnel moved through their routines with a new awareness of the complexity that could exist beneath surface appearances, and conversations carried an undertone of reflection about assumptions they might have made about their own colleagues and teammates. Rodriguez walked slowly back to the equipment area, his mind working through the implications of everything he'd learned. For 3 years, he'd been the informal leader among the base's infantry specialists, confident in his ability to assess military capability and tactical competence. That confidence hadn't been misplaced, as experience and achievements were legitimate and valuable, but the morning had taught him that expertise in one area didn't automatically qualify him to evaluate excellence in all areas that he thought about the soldiers he'd worked with throughout his career. Wondering how many times he might have missed exceptional capabilities because they didn't match his expectations or fit his understanding of what military competence looked like. The possibility that he'd overlooked valuable assets or failed to show appropriate respect to personnel whose contributions he hadn't recognized was unsettling, but also provided direction for improving his effectiveness as a leader and teammate. Whitfield found himself examining his own marksman training with new perspective, recognizing that his precision shooting expertise had taught him to account for variables that weren't immediately apparent, but that he hadn't applied the same analytical rigor to human assessment. Wind speed, atmospheric pressure, and target movement all influenced shot placement in ways that required careful measurement and consideration. Yet he'd evaluated Voss's capabilities based on surface observations without investigating the hidden factors that might influence her performance. The parallel between technical precision and personnel evaluation was instructive. Just as effective marksmanship required understanding complex systems and multiple variables, accurate assessment of human capability demanded recognition that experience, training, and background created competencies that might not be visible. Without careful investigation, Chun's technical background had given him appreciation for sophisticated systems and complex capabilities, but he realized that his evaluation criteria had been limited to equipment and procedures that matched his own experience. Voss's tactical computer had been operating throughout their interaction at levels that exceeded his understanding, processing information and maintaining capabilities that he hadn't suspected despite his familiarity with military technology. Lesson extended beyond specific equipment to broader principles about recognizing expertise in unfamiliar forms. His assumption that technological competence was easily identifiable had proven wrong, and future effectiveness would require maintaining openness to capabilities that might operate according to different principles or serve purposes that weren't immediately apparent. Knox completed her post-exercise documentation with particular attention to details that she would have considered routine before the morning's events. The training supervisor's role required accurate assessment of facility operations and personnel performance, but she now understood that her evaluation framework might need expansion to account for factors that weren't captured through standard metrics and conventional observation. The exercise results from Voss's solo operation would remain in facility records as documentation of exceptional performance, but more importantly, they would serve as ongoing reminders that training effectiveness couldn't be measured solely through traditional criteria. Future operations would benefit from maintaining awareness that exceptional capability might emerge from unexpected sources and require different approaches to recognition and evaluation. Voss gathered her equipment with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized her entire morning at Fort Valdez, preparing to continue her assignment with intelligence, gathering objectives that extended beyond the specific exercise she'd completed. Her mission would continue for another 72 hours, providing additional opportunities to evaluate facility, operations, and personnel interactions while maintaining the cover that had proven so effective in revealing authentic attitudes. And assumptions. The tactical computer on her forearm continued its quiet operation, processing and recording information that would contribute to comprehensive analysis of training effectiveness and security protocols. The counter display remained steady, showing numbers that represented operational achievements spanning multiple years of classified service. But the device's primary function during this assignment involved gathering intelligence about conventional military training and personnel development rather than tracking new operational metrics. As she prepared to leave the immediate training area, Voss reflected on the morning's interactions and their educational value for all participants. The exercise had provided useful data about how effectively current training programs prepared personnel to recognize and respect exceptional military capability, and the results would influence recommendations for program modifications and facility operations. The three soldiers who had initially positioned themselves as her informal instructors were now engaged in quiet conversation that suggested ongoing processing of the morning's lessons. Their reaction to discovering her actual background had provided valuable intelligence about base personnel's adaptability and professional growth potential, information that would contribute to comprehensive evaluation of facility effectiveness. Rivera completed her facility inspection with documentation that would support strategic recommendations for training program enhancement and security protocol modification. The morning's events had demonstrated both strengths and areas for improvement in current operations, and her report would influence policy decisions affecting multiple commands and training facilities throughout the Pacific Theater. But beyond the immediate operational implications, the situation at Fort Valdez had illustrated broader principles about human assessment and professional interaction that extended far beyond military service. The lessons learned would influence how personnel approached evaluation and collaboration throughout their careers, creating ripple effects that would improve effectiveness in countless future situations. The story of Staff Sergeant Daniela Voss and her morning at the Tactical Training Complex would become part of Fort Valdez's informal educational curriculum, shared by personnel who wanted to illustrate the importance of professional humility and the danger of assumptions based on limited information. Each retelling would reinforce principles that enhanced military effectiveness while promoting respect and recognition for diverse forms of excellence. Years later, Rodriguez would find himself telling the story to new soldiers, emphasizing the importance of maintaining openness to being surprised by their colleagues' capabilities. Whitfield would incorporate the lessons into his instruction of junior marksmen, teaching them that precision in assessment required the same careful attention to detail that characterized effective shooting. Shun would use the experience to illustrate how technological expertise needed to be balanced with appreciation for human factors that couldn't be quantified through conventional analysis. Have you ever encountered someone who completely changed your assumptions about what capability looks like? Maybe it was the quiet colleague who solved problems everyone else found impossible, or the unassuming person who turned out to have extraordinary background and achievements. What would you have thought if you'd seen those numbers incrementing on Daniela's tactical computer? Would you have recognized them as something significant, or would you have dismissed them as routine data like the three soldiers did? Think about the people in your own life: co-workers, neighbors, fellow students, or community members. How many of them might be carrying experiences, knowledge, or capabilities that you've never suspected because they don't match your expectations about what expertise looks like? The quiet administrative assistant might be a former CEO. The elderly volunteer might be a retired federal judge. The unassuming person in your training class might be someone whose achievements would astonish you if you knew their full story. The most dangerous mistake we can make is assuming that we understand someone's capabilities based on their apparent role, their age, their gender, or any other surface characteristic. Real competence often operates quietly, without fanfare or self-promotion, and the people who have achieved the most are frequently those who feel the least need to advertise their accomplishments. Next time you meet someone new, or work with a colleague you think you know well, remember Staff Sergeant Voss and the lesson of Fort Valdez. Remember that respect isn't something you give conditionally based on proof of worthiness. It's something you offer as the foundation for discovering the exceptional capabilities that might be hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes the person you dismiss as routine or unremarkable turns out to be exactly the person whose expertise could change everything. What stories are the people around you carrying? What would you discover if you approached every interaction with the humility to be surprised and the wisdom to recognize that true capability often wears the most ordinary disguises? Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.